thyself. Arise, black man, arise. Arise and know thyself. Remember we came down here as slaves, and to get a little job you have to trim and shave. Your heaven becomes your grave. Black man, arise. Arise, black man, arise.
Greetings. Hello. Do I have lipstick on my teeth? No. Hi. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I see like 10 of y'all tuning in right now. Good morning. If you can hear me talking, please share this post. Hi, Bird. If you can hear me talking, please share this post. If you can't hear me talking, if you have any issues hearing or seeing the show, drop them in the comments. We'll resolve those. I know last weekend during the Pan-African film series, we had some technical difficulties and y'all helped us. You helped us figure it out. So please, if you have any problems, can't see me, can't hear me, please put them in the chat and we'll figure it out. But my name is Onya Sanwu. I'm an organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, specifically the New Mexico chapter. This is our weekly show that we do every single Thursday. It used to be at 11 a.m. Now it is at 12 p.m. because I work. We all work day jobs and we literally do the show like in between job responsibilities. And so sometimes it's just got to get moved around. So we are starting at 12 p.m. Mountain Time going forward. We appreciate y'all tuning in every week. We appreciate your participation and your comments and your shares. As I mentioned, I am a cadre organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary Party, or the AAPRP, as well as the All African Women's Revolutionary Union, which is the women's wing of the AAPRP. I've been in the AAPRP for like almost a decade. I was thinking about that yesterday because we were doing like a reflection on all the past work of AAPRP New Mexico over the past 3 years that we've existed. And it was like so much stuff. And I was like, damn, I've given like a lot of my life to this organization and it's been incredibly worth it. It has been like the proudest honor of my entire life. So almost 10 years for me in this party, and we are a revolutionary, Pan-African, socialist, political party based in Africa, founded in Africa 52 years ago by Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah was, of course, the first democratically elected president of the first nation to gain independence from colonialism. That nation was Ghana. And after Ghana gained its independence, Kwame Nkrumah correctly assessed that the liberation of Ghana was meaningless unless all of Africa was free, unified, and socialist. And so that is why the APRP was created. He called for our formation in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, which is an incredible book you can check out. You can actually find it for free, like PDFs on the internet. Read it. But in that book, Kwame Nkrumah calls for the formation of the All African People's Revolutionary Party to unite these struggling organizations and the liberation movements of the African continent around one objective of Pan-Africanism, one unified socialist Africa. So we started this show in March, back at the beginning of the pandemic, when the very first lockdown started. We had been doing a ton of in-person events. Like last night, we went through 3 years of all these events, and I was like, we have done so much stuff. And so we were doing these in-person events, focused on political education, focused on raising the consciousness of our people. And then, of course, COVID hit, and we were like, it's not safe to have people in person, but we still want to talk to y'all. We still want to build with y'all. So what we do? And we came up with this show as a means of connecting to our people, as a means of continuing the work of political education so that, you know, it will never stop because we're trying to build a revolution. So we've been doing this since March, every single week. Every single show, we do a political education topic. We give y'all COVID updates, but we always start off with two things every single show. First, we want to call in an African ancestor. And the reason why we do that is because we, as African revolutionaries, understand our work as a continuum of struggle that began the very first moment a foreign invader set foot on the shores of Africa. So African people have been fighting for liberation for centuries. And the APRP understands our work as part of that same struggle. It's not a new phase. We're not reinventing the wheel. We are building upon work that has been continuing for centuries, which means our ancestors, our African ancestors, are the reason why we are here able to do this work today. They're the reason why I'm even talking to you right now. They're the reason why I even have this analysis. They are certainly the reason why the APRP exists. And so it would be messed up for us not to acknowledge their contribution and not to acknowledge the work they did to make it possible for us to fight today. So the ancestor I want to bring in is someone who I have never met. I did not have the pleasure of meeting her. but whose influence within the APRP is obvious to me on a day-to-day basis. And that person is Mauna Coyote, who is one of the founding members of the AAWRU. The AAWRU was actually not around from the very beginning of the APRP. The AAWRU was formed because the women within the APRP were like, patriarchy is a mess, and we need our own space to organize for liberation of African women. We need to make sure that the liberation or the struggle for Pan-Africanism and the struggle to liberate African people also addresses patriarchy and the oppression of women and the oppression of marginalized genders. And in order to do that, women and marginalized genders need our own spaces within our organizations to develop politically, to develop analysis of our conditions, to develop analysis of patriarchy, and to develop analysis of how we can move collectively to destroy those things as we fight the revolution. So Mauna Coyote, like I said, I never had the honor of meeting her. I wish I had. But she was a massive influence within the party, obviously instrumental in the founding of our women's wing. Men talk about her with like reverence and respect because she let them know there wasn't going to be, like, she wasn't going to deal with any mess, any patriarchal mess. She made the women into strong revolutionaries that are fighting to build the AWRU to this day. You can very, very clearly see her influence in the organization even decades after her passing, and that is a testament to what a remarkable organizer she was. If you want to read more about Mauna Coyote, she actually has a page dedicated to her honor on the APRP website, which I'm going to drop in the chat. And I definitely recommend that folks read about her. Like, the true heroes of the African liberation struggle are almost always unknown. Instead, we got heroes that have sold us out, that have compromised with capitalism, that have assimilated into the system. But the people who, for their entire lives, fought to build something better, fought to build something that was specifically for African people, fought to build our movement and organizations, for the most part, you don't even know who those people are. And Mauna Coyote is absolutely one of those unknown heroes that did remarkable work to build the struggle for our liberation. So please, please, please check out that page. Read about her. Read about how incredible she was. Read about how she dedicated her whole life to the liberation of her people, and try to live up to her example every single day, just like I do. So that's the calling in of an ancestor. Today we are bringing in Mauna Coyote with some, I don't want to call her that, because usually I say like bad bitch is a compliment, but like it's not respectful. Some people don't like that. But when I say it, it's like the highest possible compliment. So I want to bring in some revolutionary African woman energy. And I'm gonna try to embody her as we talk about this very important political education subject. And so, like I said, the other thing that we do at the beginning of every show is we acknowledge that we are on stolen land. We are on stolen land. The entirety of the Western Hemisphere belonged to hundreds of indigenous nations, and then Europeans came in and stole the land and committed genocide against those nations and built like the US empire and all this bullshit in this place. And so when we acknowledge the land, we are saying that this land was stolen, it remains stolen, and the rightful owners are still here, and we are going to fight for them to get their land back. So I'm speaking to y'all on Tiwa territory, also known as Albuquerque, New Mexico, but Albuquerque, New Mexico was built on the land of the Tiwa Nation. This land will always belong to the Tiwa. Doesn't matter how long ago it was stolen, it's still their land. And if we have anything to say about it whatsoever, they will be getting that land back. We will fight for them to get their land back, just as we will fight to get our land back in Africa. So this is Tiwa land. It always will be, and they will get it back. That's not a metaphor. So that's the land acknowledgement. And so, like I mentioned, every single show, we also do a political education topic. You are not going to come to an APRP event anywhere, at any time, in any place, whether it's in Africa or the United States or France or Canada, and not be hit with some political education. It is the core of the work that the AAPRP does. We are a propaganda party. We have a strong ideological focus. We are trying to win our people to the struggle to build Pan-Africanism, one unified socialist Africa. And as ancestor Malcolm X always said, you cannot organize a sleeping people. You must wake them up, and that's how you get some action. Political education is how we wake y'all up. We shake you awake. We say this is nonsense. The system's nonsense. It's oppressing us. It's exploiting us, and we have to understand and destroy it. And so political education is how we do that work. We do it internally with work study for every single member of the APRP, and we do it externally with things like the film series, things like this show, and things like our assorted seminars, as well as writings and such. So every single show, we do political education. We open it up with that. And so this show, we're going to be talking about colonialism. Specifically, what is colonialism? When I talk about my people, or people who are known as like people of color, I always call them colonized people. And sometimes people are like, but what do you mean? And so I think it's really, really important, particularly for people like me, African people, indigenous people, and people that are oppressed by white supremacy and racism, to understand precisely what colonialism is. Because though white supremacy and racism are constantly in our face, we have to understand them as tactics of the structure of colonialism under imperialism and capitalism. Colonialism is the fundamental contradiction. It is why we are here dealing with this stuff in the first place. And so understanding it is key to ending our exploitation. I see y'all in the comments. We have an indigenous comment saying, we're still here, absolutely, and fighting for your land. Albuquerque, Tiwa Territory, New Mexico has like one of the most robust indigenous national liberation movements that I've ever been exposed to. I grew up in the East Coast in Massachusetts, where there are many, many, many places named for indigenous nations, but indigenous nations themselves are almost entirely erased. Like, they still exist, they're still there, it's still their land, but there's like a lot of work put into pretending they're not there anymore, pretending they're like an artifact of the past. Whereas here in New Mexico, they are front and center. I remember the very first place I lived, the lady I paid my rent to would talk in like demon. And that was the first time I'd ever heard it in real life. And like, that is like how upfront indigenous culture is, but also like indigenous resistance in the form of revolutionary indigenous organizations, in the form of revolutionary indigenous nationalism, like Pueblo nationalism from Pueblo Action Alliance. So really, like, living here has been a crash course for me in understanding that indigenous people are not only still here, they still exist, but they are fighting. They're fighting to get their land back. This struggle is not over. Settler colonialism has not been finished. They are still fighting to get their land back, and I think they're gonna win. I think they're gonna be successful. Greetings, Arthur. Greetings, Blade Jammer, land back. So, political education topic. What is colonialism? Colonialism, in a nutshell, is when a foreign dominating power rolls up into another nation's land and begins stealing their shit. That's like the most basic way to understand it. It's like if your neighbor had a house and you rolled up in their house and you're like, this is my house now, and I'm gonna eat all your food, and I'm gonna take all your clothes, and I'm gonna like enslave your mom. That's what colonialism is. It's basically when someone who has no business in a given territory is like, oh, those are sweet resources, that's some sweet land, I would like to steal your labor, decides to exploit another people. They have all kinds of justifications for why this happens. They say we're actually trying to help. They say, oh, you all didn't know how to live, even though you were existing fine for thousands of years, so we're going to show you the right way. They say we're trying to civilize y'all. They say that you're not using your land right, so we're going to help you. All kinds of justifications exist for why colonialism happens, but the fundamental thing to understand about it, it is literally just when a foreign power rolls into another nation that is just minding its business and says, we are going to steal your land, we are going to steal your resources, we are going to exploit your people, and we are going to attack and destroy your indigenous culture. This has happened for centuries all over the world. Europe, once it became a global power in the 15th century, in the 15th century, in the 1500s and the 1400s, decided that because they didn't have the resources they wanted in their tiny little bitch-ass landmass, they were going to go to the Western Hemisphere, they were going to go to Africa, they were going to go to Asia, they were going to go to Australia, and they were just going to straight up steal other people's stuff. Everything else, all the rhetoric around it, all the justifications for why that happened, all the things that ended up blaming the people that got stolen from, all of that is like meaningless. The fundamental issue is that these foreign dominating powers, these European powers, went to places where they didn't belong and stole from people, murdered people, enslaved people. That is colonialism in its most basic essence. It's just stealing and exploiting. All this other fancy stuff that people try to build up around it doesn't matter to me. All I know is that y'all did not belong there. You went to some place that was not yours, and you stole from people, and you enslaved them, and then you built an entire global structure to maintain that relationship. So that's what colonialism is, and its very essence, a foreign dominating power rolling up in another nation's territory and stealing from that nation, exploiting that nation, murdering the people that live there. Within the category of colonialism, there are multiple types. And when I say types, I mean specific strategies for how this foreign dominating power works to maintain its domination over the targeted country. So I'm going to talk about three main types. This is by no means meant to be like an exhaustive, because, you know, one thing that colonialism is really good at is adapting. Colonialism is extremely good at switching up the tactic, switching up the look and feel, switching up the aesthetic in order to maintain that dominating relationship. So I'm going to talk about the three primary types that are dominating the world right now, but understand that colonialism is extremely adaptable because they want to fundamentally maintain that dominating relationship. So first and foremost is what I like to call crude or like classic style colonialism. And that's basically just when like the conquistadors came to Mexico, came to Central and South America and started like stealing resources and looting gold and like enslaving the indigenous people. Like that was the classic style colonialism. When a foreign power just came into someone else's land, it was like, oh, sweet gold, we're gonna ship it back to Spain or ship it back to France or whatever. So that's what that's called, crude or classic style colonialism. It's the form of colonialism that folks are like most familiar with. It's also the form of colonialism that folks assume is like a thing of the past. That is not actually the case. The United States, as we speak, has many, many crude colonies in which their primary function, their primary relationship to the United States is literally just getting their resources stolen and getting blamed for it. That's Puerto Rico's situation. Puerto Rico is like basically a client state of the United States against its will. Like Puerto Rico would like to be independent and the United States is like, no, we're good. We're gonna keep you. And literally all that United States does with Puerto Rico is just like extract wealth, steal land, sell off chunks of it to like Bitcoin billionaires or whatever. And then when a hurricane destroys Puerto Rico because of catastrophic climate change, which is happening more and more often, the United States is like, good luck with that. We took all your money. We took all your resources. We deliberately underdeveloped you. We made you into a resource colony. And then when your stuff is destroyed, we're just going to sit back and be like, wow, I hope that works out. I wonder how I can make money from this. So that's crude style colonialism. Other forms of colonialism. A really important form of colonialism to understand, particularly in the context of the United States, is settler colonialism. Settler-colonialism. And what is settler colonialism? It is a form of colonialism, a structure of colonialism in which foreign invaders, typically European invaders, invade a foreign nation and through a war of attrition, uneven war of attrition, deliberately targeting the most vulnerable sectors of that nation, they steal the land through military conquest and subterfuge. They commit acts of genocide to attempt to kill off the indigenous population. And then they settle in that stolen territory and establish new European republics that are still directly connected to the home country, the metropole. It's literally a structure, settler colonialism, where the foreign invading power is attempting to replace the rightful owners of the land they're trying to steal. Settler colonialism at its base is a project of genocide because the foreign invaders, the Europeans, are seeking to replace the indigenous population and claim themselves as the rightful owner of the land. The Europeans will never be the rightful owner of the land as long as the indigenous nations still exist. And so the Europeans must engage in a continuous project of trying to kill off and destroy those indigenous nations. So I said it's very, very important to understand settler colonialism in the United States because the United States itself is an overgrown settler colony, a British settler colony. It is at this point, a settler empire in which indigenous nations still exist on their land, but they are increasingly marginalized. They are corralled into reservations. They are drastically underdeveloped. They are denied basic access to the necessities required for them to live. Their land is continuously destroyed and drilled for resources and taken out from under them. And that is all part of this process of killing them off so that the foreign invaders can claim the land has always been there. So the United States, of course, is a settler colony or a settler empire. Canada began as a settler colony and is now a settler state. Israel, built on occupied Palestine, is one of the newest settler colonies that exist. It's like literally unfolding right in front of our eyes. They are trying to commit genocide against the Palestinian people. They're trying to kill them off on their own land in order to claim Israel for the invaders. Australia is a settler state. And then also in Africa, there were dozens of settler states. There was Zimbabwe. There was Azania. Azania had a struggle against apartheid, but settlers, European settlers, still control the majority of the land in Azania. Azania is another name for South Africa, if you didn't know. Algeria was a settler state. The French settled there and dispossessed the Africans in Algeria on their own land. The Congo was a settler state. Namibia was a settler state. And so settler colonialism is a very pervasive form of colonization in which the foreign dominating power attempts to replace the indigenous population. Someone's spamming. No, I don't want to be famous. Let me block you. Anywho. And when they try to replace the indigenous population, they try to kill them off, and they try to say, this land has always been ours. We don't even know who those people are. So that's settler colonization. And it's really, really, like I said, it's extremely important to understand settler colonialism in the United States, because the United States, as in its entirety, is a settler colony. The U.S. government is a settler state. The indigenous nations, in order for the U.S. to exist, indigenous people had to be brutally attacked and dispossessed and stolen from. Every single U.S. president, even the ones you really like Abraham Lincoln for whatever reason, every single U.S. president, every single representative within the U.S. government is complicit in this process of dispossessing indigenous people, because the United States literally could not exist. It could not exist as an entity without this extreme violence against the rightful owners of this land, which once again is continuing because those indigenous nations are still here. They're still fighting, like I said at the beginning of the show, to get their land back. And as long as they are doing that, the United States cannot stop the project of genocide against them. So when people say there's a lot of, Africans, right, in the African liberation struggle in the United States and the struggle against police terrorism in the United States, who are this is a struggle for the soul of the nation. We are trying to fight to restore American democracy, or we're trying to fight to get the U.S. to live up to its ideals. And whenever I hear that, I cringe, because from the very, very, very beginning of the United States as the project, from the very first moment that the United States existed as an entity, it could not have existed without the acts of genocide and violence and dispossession targeting indigenous people. Very often, African people in the United States have no problem whatsoever recognizing how messed up it is that Europeans control over 80% of the land in South Africa. To this day, even post the struggle against apartheid, even after the formal ending of that structure of Jim Crow style segregation on African people's own land, to this day, European people own the majority of the land in South Africa, in Azania. And I am very sure that there are very few African people that have a problem, have an issue recognizing the problem with that. But when it comes to the United States, there's an invisibility about the fundamental nature of this place, about what was required to make this empire exist. Even when people do their little land acknowledgements, or their acknowledgements of indigenous people on Thanksgiving, even when that kind of symbolic stuff is happening, there's still an assumption about the legitimacy of the United States as an entity that it's not challenged. Even within social justice movements, people think this place has a right to exist, even though the people that were violently dispossessed for it to exist are still here and are still we want our land back. People are oh no, this is fine, and this is gonna last forever, and we should fight for this to continue. No. It's not okay to dispossess people. It's not okay to murder people and steal their shit. It never has been. It wasn't hundreds of years ago, and it's not today, while it's still happening. In order for the United States to exist as an empire, in order for the United States to exist as an entity, extreme violence is done to indigenous people on an ongoing basis. Who remembers the movement for Standing Rock, right? When indigenous people were fighting so that just everybody could just have clean water. They're if you build an oil pipeline through this river, you're going to destroy the water supply for tens of thousands of people. Not just indigenous people, all kinds of people. And so they were we would like you not to do that. This is our land. People need water to live. Don't do that. And they organized a largely nonviolent movement that was representative of the beauty of indigenous culture on their own land. And in response, the US government under Democratic President Barack Obama engaged in an uneven war against them, in which they hired mercenaries to spy on them, poison them, and attack them, like blowing people's arms off, blowing their eyes off. They were just out there praying, saying, don't destroy the water. The United States was like, we are going to destroy this movement with extreme violence and prejudice. That is the reality of settler colonialism. The rightful owners of this land are like, man, life needs water to live. And the United States government is like, fuck you. We are going to burn this shit down. We are going to spy on you. We're going to give you felony charges and lock you up for life. We're going to destroy this any way we can because we want to destroy that water. We want to put the oil pipeline through your land. The process of settler colonization, the existence of settler states like the United States, like Israel, like Australia, like Azania, it depends on unending violence against the indigenous population. The United States could not exist without brutal violence against indigenous nations, just like the settler government of Azania, or the settler government of Zimbabwe, or it was called Rhodesia at the time, or the settler government of Israel cannot exist without unending violence against the indigenous population. The United States cannot exist as an entity without violence. And so if you are a proud American, if you are like, well, it has some flaws, but it's the best we got. If you are like, well, you know, we need to build a better nation or whatever, a better American, you are co-signing all of this violence. You cannot identify as an American without co-signing the dispossession, the violent dispossession of indigenous peoples, as well as the enslavement of my ancestors, the colonization of Africa, and neocolonialism across the entire Western Hemisphere. That's what you're co-signing when you say you're American. There's no way around it. America, the United States of America, as an entity would not exist without the violence that I'm talking about. So either you're cool with that when you say you're American, or you stop saying you're American and fight back with us. Like, those are your options. You cannot be American and separate yourself from the violence required to keep America going. I don't want to say America because, like, there's South America, Central America, and North America. I'm going to say US, America. And if I slip up, just remember I'm speaking specifically about the United States. So that is settler colonialism. It is a structure in which European invaders wear down the indigenous population through wars of attrition, steal their lands through military conquest and trickery and subterfuge, and then later settle in that stolen territory and establish European-controlled nations. And they also engage in ongoing acts of violence against the indigenous population to keep them on the bottom of the society, to keep them dispossessed, to keep them from fighting back, from getting their land stolen, with the ultimate objective of killing those people off entirely. That is what you are co-signing when you call yourself American. I personally would not co-sign that, and that's why I say I'm African. That's settler colonialism. Like I said, the ultimate goal of a settler colonial project is to completely replace the indigenous population, to kill them off all the way and replace them with the foreign dominating power. And it happens by any means necessary, and it's happening because they want to legitimize. The invading power wants to legitimize its theft of land and resources by saying the land was always there. You can actually see that really clearly in the way that Zionists defend the existence of Israel. Israel is, of course, an illegal settler state built on occupied Palestine. Palestine is the rightful land of Palestinians, point blank period. But what Zionists do is make up ancient history to say, you know, the Palestinians are actually the invaders and we were always here, so we're just coming here to take our land back. That's what Zionism does. And sometimes when people post about what's happening in Palestine, you'll see people in the comments like with that kind of rhetoric talking about they actually stole the land from us. It's the people of European descent whose ancestors were fucking from Germany and France and shit. We're the rightful indigenous people of this Middle Eastern country. Like, that's the rhetoric of Zionists, right? Because they're attempting to say that the invaders have always owned the land. They have to delegitimize the Palestinian claim to the land in order to make what Israel is doing okay. And that is a very, very common feature of, settler colonial projects. They attempt to say we are actually the rightful owners of this land. It's very, very similar to what European settlers do in the United States, where they say, I have a Cherokee grandma, or way back, I had like an indigenous relative. It's their attempt to indigenize themselves to legitimize their claim to this stolen ass land. It's a very common feature of settler colonial projects. It's just like myth making around who the rightful owner of the land is. And all it's really about is confusing the issue and attempting to legitimize theft. That's it. The other really important thing to understand about settler colonialism is that it is by necessity a cross-class project within the invading nation. And what I mean by cross-class is that it's not just like the ruling class, like really rich people. We talked about who the ruling class is, right? It's the people who control the means of production or the ways that goods and services are produced in a given society. They're the ones that are making all of our lives hell right now. So that's the ruling class. But settler colonialism isn't just the ruling class doing this work that I'm talking about. It is by necessity a cross-class project, which means the petty bourgeois, like the middle managers, and the poor and working class elements of the invading nation are all engaged in this project of dispossession. The ruling class is like certainly directing it and benefiting like the main beneficiaries of it because they're making most of the money and getting most of the resources. But in terms of like the actual theft of land, in terms of like the day-to-day violence against the indigenous peoples, it is cross-class. It is very often working class colonizers that are engaged in the day-to-day work of dispossessing and stealing from and terrorizing colonized peoples, indigenous peoples. And that's really, really important to understand, particularly in the United States and really any other settler colony, because in order to make revolution here, right, we have to build a poor and working class people's movement. But if a segment of those poor working class people are settlers who are directly invested in dispossessing other colonized peoples, then that has to be addressed. It's got to be addressed. Like there's so many like socialist parties or communist parties in the United States who are dominated by Europeans and who, because of that, have nothing to say whatsoever about settler colonialism and about the theft of indigenous land and about the need for those people to get their land back. Like there's I call them like cracker communists or settler socialists because they think that they can just replace the illegal capitalist settler state government of the United States with an illegal settler state socialist government without like dealing with the question of like giving the land back. And no, man, that's not gonna happen. We're not doing that. No, like you don't just get to build a settler state or a socialist state on land that's still stolen, right? Like you don't have the right. You don't have the right. It is indigenous nations of the United States, of the Western Hemisphere, who are going to determine what happens on this land. If you're going to sidestep them and be like, we're helping you, we're building socialism, and not give their land back, that is not a revolutionary objective. That is just continuing the violence of settler colonialism. Cracker communists, settler socialists, people that believe that we can fight for revolution in the United States without dealing with the land question are no different than cracker communists or settler socialists in Tanzania who believe they have an equal right to land that was stolen from African people. There's point blank period not going to be a revolution on stolen land that is not led by the indigenous peoples of that land. No one has the right to continue the theft of this land, to continue the violence against indigenous nations. This is their land. And any revolution, any fight for justice on this territory must uphold the fact that this is their land and they must get it back and they must decide what happens here. Luckily for us, indigenous peoples all over the world, in the United States, in Africa, are extremely humanistic, are extremely focused on justice and decolonization and liberation, but are not necessarily focused on vengeance, which we would have every right to be, but they're not. Like if you look at, for example, the Red Nation and their Red Deal, which is basically like their blueprint for how liberation would be built in a revolution led by indigenous people, they're all about making sure everybody's good as long as they control their land. They're not trying to like kick people off. They're not trying to like deport Europeans. Like sometimes I'm like, man, just go back to Europe. Just go back to Europe and leave us alone. But the Red Nation and most revolutionary indigenous organizations are not saying that. They're saying we want our land back. They're saying we want y'all, like the U.S. military, like be brought back from all these places where it's invading and want the resources used for invasion and conquest to be used to build basic necessities for people. They're saying let's stop destroying the planet and drilling for oil and like looting resources and poisoning the water and instead be focused on a green economy that's actually socialist, not capitalist. Like they are trying to help everybody while getting their land back. But if they were like, y'all need to get the fuck up out of here, this is our shit, they would have every right to do so, but they're not. So, you know, cracker communists, settler socialists, I need to come up with like a snappy one for like anarchists, because there's definitely anarchists that are trying to build like new settler projects. But like those people who refuse to deal with the land question on stolen land are not going to be leading any kind of revolution on this territory. Indigenous nations have to decide what happens on their land. Decolonization must happen. Land must be returned in order for a revolutionary project to be successful, no matter what you're trying to build. So that is settler colonialism. As someone saying in the comments, settlers, invaders attempt to naturalize themselves, attempt to make themselves the rightful owners of indigenous lands, attempt to say the indigenous peoples are somehow interlopers and they are the rightful owners. So that is like a very core feature of like myth making, of the ideological basis of settler colonialism, is like pretending that we are the rightful owners, or the invaders the rightful owners. So that's settler colonialism. Once again, a structure in which European invaders wear down the indigenous population through wars of attrition, steal their land and resources through military conquest, and later settle in the stolen territory and attempt to establish European-controlled republics. That is what the United States is. That is what the United States will always will be. It is an overgrown settler state, a settler empire. Last form of neocolonialism, or rather colonialism, that I want to touch on this morning is neocolonialism. Neocolonialism. And the easiest way to understand neocolonialism is it's basically when the foreign dominating power is still stealing from you and stealing your land and stealing your resources, but they use someone that looks like you to make you think that you are independent. And the reason why neocolonialism came to be is that throughout the 20th century, there were all these armed struggles that overthrew colonialism in place after place after place. Like there were successful armed struggles against settler colonialism that brought settler states to an end all over Africa. Like African revolutionary struggles decisively defeated settler colonialism in multiple places. Multiple places. Like that's why you hear people cussing out Zimbabwe and Mugabe on CNN like constantly, because Zimbabwe fought an armed struggle for national liberation, and then when they won and had chased out a bunch of settlers, they took the land back. They took the land back under President Robert Mugabe, and they started giving that land back to African people. And once that started happening, the United States and Britain were like, what the hell? They were pissed, and that's why Zimbabwe is sanctioned. That's why their currency is hyperinflated. That's why they're having all these problems that people blame on Mugabe. No, the reason why that's happening in Zimbabwe is because Zimbabwe fought a successful struggle of national liberation and brought settler colonialism to an end and took the land back. So, goddamn it, people should really look at Africa, for example, the successful struggles against colonization, because man, we have struggled against crude colonialism, we have struggled against settler colonialism, and we have won. We have won. And then they were so scared of what we did that they attempted to destroy independent African nations with sanctions and demonization. So I bet you when I said Robert Mugabe, there were a bunch of people that were like, wasn't he a dictator? Man, the reason why you think he's a dictator is because Zimbabwe under Mugabe took the land back and gave it to African people. And the United States and Britain worked overtime to demonize that project. Anywho, so neocolonialism. I got off on a tangent because settler colonialism makes you so like, it's like so fundamental to understand how to like organize revolution and like fight colonization, but like it's so invisible in the United States. Like people just don't, like they just like assume that the US empire has always existed and will always exist, and indigenous people will just have their land stolen forever. And so yeah, it just like drives me wild because I'm just like, damn, y'all, like this is their land. It always will be. Like they're still here. Oh my God. Anyway, so yeah. Neocolonialism is when the foreign domination of the invading power has a face that looks like yours. The nation may on paper look independent, but in reality, all of its affairs, its economy is controlled by an outside power, and the outside power just has figureheads that look like us to make us think that we're actually free. Neocolonialism typically takes the forms of like aid and investment and finance capital. And when they have to do like the stick rather than like the carrot, they'll use sanctions to control the country. So neocolonialism is a system in which the country has all appearances externally of being independent, but in reality, its entire existence, its economy, its military, its control, its government is controlled by a foreign power. So what are some examples of neocolonialism? What are some examples of this appearance of independence where in the background, domination is still continuing by the foreign power? Well, here in the United States, we are very, very familiar with neocolonialism as a concept because it's constantly in our face, but unfortunately, people don't recognize it. My favorite example of neocolonialism as strategy is the entire presidency of Barack Obama. Barack Obama, man, he has a book coming out this week where he is just like feeling himself and bragging about killing people and he told like some story where he said he was in college, he like read Marx and Fanon to try to get chicks, and I was like, oh my god, this man sucks. But anyway, so Barack Obama was the first African president of the United States of America. And I remember even when I was like, that was like before I was political, the first time he ran for office, it was like the first time I was like legally old enough to vote, and I remember I voted for him. And then when he won, I cried because I was like, oh my god, he looks like me and he's gonna help us and he's like on our side. And then of course, when he got into office, both terms, what did Barack Obama do? Well, Barack Obama oversaw the largest military expansion of the US military in the African continent in the history of the world. Barack Obama oversaw a massive transfer of wealth from African people to huge banks. Barack Obama saw those same banks escape accountability for devastating the economy and costing many, many people generational wealth. And also many, many people losing their homes. He like helped them dodge accountability, like didn't even try to prosecute them. Barack Obama oversaw the biggest deportation machine in the history of the United States, deported more people than any other U.S. president. And not only was he responsible for more deportations than any other U.S. president in history, but his administration was also directly responsible for creating the conditions that led to those people trying to get to the United States in the first place. My family's from Honduras. My dad is from Haiti. My mom's from Honduras. My mama lives in Honduras right now. We are Garifuna. And Barack Obama, under using Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, overthrew a democratically elected president in Honduras. His name was Manuel Zelaya. He was a social democrat. He was attempting to nationalize Honduran resources and also to build a constituent assembly that represented African people, indigenous people, poor people, queer people, trans people. He wanted to basically put the resources and future of Honduras in the hands of the masses of people. The United States under President Barack Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was like, no, we need to like keep stealing your land and resources, so we can't have that. And so they overthrew this Democratic president and put in place a dictator that would do whatever they said, that brutalized the people living in Honduras, that hired secret police that were funded and trained by the US government, that basically engaged in acts of barbarism that have made Honduras unlivable. Unlivable. That is what Barack Obama's administration did. And so because the Barack Obama administration overthrew the democratically elected president of Honduras and created conditions that were unlivable, we are now seeing a situation where thousands of people are fleeing Honduras and surrounding countries for the US border. And when they get to that border, they are put into immigration detention centers or they are trapped in Mexico. And then they are deported back to those unlivable conditions. It was Barack Obama's administration that created the conditions for mass migration. First African president of the United States. And then once those people got there, once those people got to the border because they could not live in their homes, no one like willingly makes a journey of thousands of miles to a place they have never been. Like no one would ever do that by choice. The only reason that those folks are doing that is because they have no choice. Because the United States Empire under the first African president, Barack Obama, made their home unlivable. And then when their home was unlivable, and they try to get here for some like reprieve, some chance to live, Barack Obama said, get the fuck up out of here. Fuck y'all. He put the first time that kids were in cages was under the Obama administration, under the first African president. The first time that children were ripped from their parents and deported back to who knows what, sometimes like straight up murder, was under Barack Obama. Barack Obama. Trump gets all of this mess, right? People call him a white nationalist. People call him a fascist for doing precisely what the Obama administration allowed him to do. The Obama administration created the infrastructure and the policy that allowed those kids to be put in cages. And all Trump really did was keep that shit going. Really. But Barack Obama is held up as a bastion of progressivism. Barack Obama is held up as somehow a symbol of hope for African people. Meanwhile, Barack Obama did colonize Africa, drone bomb the Middle East, committed the first extrajudicial murders of US citizens ordered by an American president, put kids in cages, overthrew the government of Honduras, also overthrew the government in Haiti, overthrew the government in Libya. This is the first African president. If we did not understand that neocolonialism was a force, we would look at that happening and be like, what the hell is going on, right? Because Barack Obama, as an African man, is supposed to be colonized. Barack Obama, as an African man, is supposed to have some affinity with the masses of his people. That's the assumption, right? That's why so many of us in 2008 and then in 2012 voted for him, lined up behind him, because we saw what he looked like. We heard what he was saying, and we assumed that he was on our side. We assumed that he understood the experience of being colonized. But in reality, Barack Obama would never have made it to that position in the first place if he was not willing to uphold the violence, the ongoing violence required to make the U.S. continue to exist as a settler state, and the ongoing violence required all around the world to keep the United States on top. He would never have made it to that position unless he was willing to do the violence required to keep the United States a superpower. So that is why Barack Obama is an extremely important example of neocolonialism in action, because Barack Obama looks like us. Barack Obama has colonized ancestry, but Barack Obama is completely willing to be a brown face in a high place within a genocidal system. That is Barack Obama. Other really clear examples of what I'm talking about, which is, again, a structure in which the foreign domination has a face that looks like ours, that looks like an oppressed person. There's like many, many examples within the U.S. government. There's Susan Rice, who was, what was her position? She was like Secretary of Defense. Let me look up this hoe. I mean, actually not use hoe as a pejorative, because I know like a lot of really nice and militant and revolutionary hoes, and this lady sucks. So she was the 27th United States Ambassador to the United Nations, and also the 24th United States National Security Advisor under the Obama administration. So Susan Rice is an African woman, but she is also one of the leading figures in the U.S. attempt to colonize Africa. Susan Rice was instrumental in the expansion of AFRICOM. Susan Rice was instrumental in the invasion of Libya that led to the lynching of Gaddafi. Susan Rice has been instrumental in the U.S.'s attempt to colonize Africa. This is an African woman whose whole career was built on invading and stealing from and exploiting African nations. An African woman in the U.S. government. And she's not the only one, man. I was like reading about the incoming members of the Biden administration, as well as the folks that were in positions of leadership when it came to AFRICOM and its expansion on the continent. And so many of those people were African women. Like Condoleezza Rice is another one. But yeah, like this whole strata of petty bourgeois African women who are in positions of leadership within the U.S. empire's project in Africa. And it's like really wild to me for a lot of reasons, particularly because I'm an African woman. But it's just very interesting that there's been this like attempt, an intentional strategy to put these women into these positions, to put them in a position of leadership when it comes to the colonization of Africa. It's like not being named. Like there's all this conversation about African men that voted for Trump, where people are like, you know, condemning them and pathologizing them and talking about like how terrible it is. And like, meanwhile, the same percentage like of African women, more African women voted for Trump in this election. Like it was like 4% more African men. So a total of 8% of African men voted for Trump. And then it was also 4% more African women in the 2020 election voted for Trump. But if you notice, when you look at like who they're talking about MSNBC, when you look at who they're talking about on the news, who they're writing New York Times articles about, there's like this focus on those men, and like the focus on like Ice Cube, and like the focus on like, you know, these male hip hop artists that everybody's like attacking for endorsing Trump. But like no one's talking about the women. No one's peeping the petty bourgeois African women in leadership in neoliberal administrations. No one's peeping the petty bourgeois African women in leadership in AFRICOM and in the USA's neocolonialism in Africa. I'm probably gonna write about it because I feel like it has to be named. I feel like it has to be called out. I feel like these women have to be like shamed. That people need to know their names. People need to know what they're doing. Susan Rice, Condoleezza Rice, Michelle Obama. Like people need to know. People need to know. Oh my God, Stacey Abrams. Woo, I hate that lady. So it's just very interesting to me that this is like it's unfolding in this particular way, but no one's really peeping it. And at the same time, as these women are occupying positions of leadership within neocolonialism, is at the same time like these movements like listen to Black women, protect Black women, like elevating them and exceptionalizing them and making them like immune to criticism. Kamala Harris is another really clear example of neocolonialism and also what I'm talking about. Kamala Harris, her whole career was built on incarcerating poor and working class African people. African men, African single mothers, African trans women were put in male prisons when Kamala Harris was Attorney General of California. So like her whole existence, her whole political existence was built upon using the state's violence to repress African people, to repress her own people. Her own people. She doesn't, I don't think that she considers us her people, but we consider her our people for some reason. Same thing with Barack Obama. But like, she would not exist as a political entity without having engaged in these acts of violence against poor working class African people. And not only is that not really dealt with, but I have seen people defend Kamala Harris. People uplift Kamala Harris by saying, well, what was she supposed to do? It was her job. She was a prosecutor. It was her job. Like, oh my God. Like, first of all, the American criminal justice system is built on upholding the violence of Charlotte colonialism. It is built on criminalizing the colonized populations that are considered a threat to the settler state. So that is indigenous people, but it is also African people. The only reason why we are disproportionately represented in the American criminal justice system is because we are a direct threat to the existence of the settler state. So that's why they have to do it. That's why we are locked up. It's not because we are more susceptible to committing crime or we're somehow more dangerous. No, it's because we are a threat to the settler state. That's why. And she signed up to do that. She signed up to do that. She put mamas in jail. Oh my God. Like, it's just like the amount of violence required for African people to have leadership within this system, the amount of violence required against their own people and against indigenous people is like breathtaking. And we are in a political moment where people are justifying it. They're justifying it. They're like, that was her job. Oh my God, sis. Like, if my job was to put mamas in jail for their kids skipping school, I just wouldn't do it. I would not do that job. I would not be like, well, I guess I have to. I signed up. No. What? No. I would never be a cop. I would never be a prosecutor. I would never be a district attorney. I wouldn't even work with those entities because it's unacceptable to be. I will not gain individual success on the backs of African indigenous people. I won't do that. But this is the choice that these Africans, these neo-colonial misleaders, these sellouts, that is the choice that they are making. And we are living in a political moment where people are justifying that. African people are justifying that. Blows my mind, man. Blows my mind. So Susan Rice, Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, all examples of neo-colonialism. Here, specifically in the United States, also like African pigs, cops, is an example of neocolonialism. Because once again, the entire purpose of the American criminal justice system, the injustice system, is to control internally colonized populations, to continue the dispossession and dehumanization of indigenous peoples, to continue the dispossession and criminalization and subjugation of African peoples, to continue the exploitation of colonized nations within the United States. That's the whole reason the criminal justice system exists. It is not a coincidence that colonized peoples, Africans, indigenous peoples, Chicanos, Filipinos, are disproportionately represented in U.S. prisons and in the criminal justice system. Because that's why it exists. It's to control us. It's to maintain the conquest of European invaders, to maintain their control while we are kept at the bottom. That's the whole reason it exists. It's not about justice. It's not about fighting crime. It's not about safety. It's about controlling us to continue the theft and the murder. That's it. That's it. So understanding that, African pigs, police officers are absolutely a part of that system. Man, in the beginning stages of Black Lives Matter, so my path to like radicalization is I helped start the Portland chapter of Black Lives Matter. And back at that point, I was like a rad lib, I guess what people call it, like a radical liberal, where you had like, you know, some level of analysis about like white supremacy and racism. Maybe talk about white privilege a lot, but you don't necessarily have like this systemic analysis where you implicate capitalism and colonialism and imperialism. So like in the in-between stage where you like see something's wrong, but you're like not necessarily understanding why it's wrong. And I remember in the beginning, like the early stages of Black Lives Matter, like right after the Mike Brown uprising, there was like so much rhetoric about how we needed more African police officers. How the solution to police terrorism in African communities was to have police officers from those communities. Like that was like a really big thing back then. It was a long ass time ago. I can't believe that. But if there's like studies that have been done about this, right? About the impact of African and colonized police officers on police violence and police terrorism against colonized peoples. And what they have found in case after case after case, study after study after study, is that the African and colonized police officers are often much harder on African and colonized people than their European counterparts. They are more violent against us. They arrest us more. They kill us more. That is what studies have found. And the reason for that is because those African pigs, those colonized pigs, feel like they have to prove themselves to their racist ass colleagues and to the racist ass system they serve. They feel like they have to prove themselves by committing violence against us. And so that is why they go much harder than their white ass, their cracker counterparts. Because they want to prove themselves to the racist ass settler colonial system they serve. And so the idea that the solution to police terrorism is more African cops, more African DAs, that is proven to be nonsense just by like objective reality. Objective reality. Kamala Harris is trying to sell herself as like a progressive prosecutor, trying to say, I did the best I could to help the people. But that woman was responsible for creating systematic policies that would deliberately target the most marginalized sectors of the African and colonized community. She was the one responsible for refusing to prosecute killer cops. She was the one responsible for creating a policy against truancy that criminalized parents. She was the one responsible for passing SESA and FASA that criminalized sex work and forced sex workers to working conditions that were much more dangerous for them. Kamala Harris, for the entirety of her career, has been hard as fuck on African and colonized and oppressed people, and she is doing that for the same reason those African pigs are that are hard on us, to prove herself to the settler colonial system that requires us to be on the bottom and exploited. So the whole idea that like, African pigs, African DAs, African whatever the fuck, black faces in high places are somehow better for us as a people is like it's not borne out by the actual reality. It's just not. It's just not. We have to deal with what's actually happening. And what's actually happening is people are selling us out and we're defending them. We're fighting for them. And then they like laugh about it. Like, I don't know if y'all have seen that video where she talks about locking up parents for their kids skipping school. And then she like laughs. Holy shit. Like, oh my God. Like, even if like, I don't understand how the solution to a kid not going to school consistently is like to take their parent away, like lock them up. Like, what do you think is going to do that kid's like day-to-day life? Doesn't make any sense on its face. But if the whole point of what you're doing is to repress and criminalize African and indigenous and colonized people, then it makes sense. You're not actually trying to help the kid, you're trying to destroy the community. And so then at that point, locking up the parent makes sense. So that's neocolonialism in the United States. African pigs, Susan Rice, Barack Obama, and Michelle Obama. I don't care for her. I used to think that she was like the better one and he just sucked. No, ma'am. First of all, she was there when he was like killing U.S. citizens from the sky. She was there when he's putting kids in cages. She was there when he invaded Africa. She was there when Gaddafi was lynched. Like, she was there for all that shit. She was there when he overthrew the Democratic elected president of Honduras and plunged that country into chaos. Like, she was there for all of it. And all she has to say about it now is keep voting for the very same people responsible for all that violence. So clearly, even if like she's co-signing, right? Like, she's saying like, I see the violence required for my position to exist. And not only do I co-sign that violence, but I would like it to continue. So please vote for Joe Biden. She's doing that shit. So clearly she's on board. So I do not care for Michelle Obama. Condoleezza Rice, Kamala Harris, all same kind of shit. Outside the United States, neocolonialism, of course, is one of the primary tactics used by imperialist powers in the present day. Like I said, after there were many, many successful military struggles against colonization throughout the colonized world that overthrew the classic style colonialism and settler colonialism, the imperialist powers we're not going to give up the wealth and the land. Like, they wanted to keep that going. And so what they did was they used this new strategy. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my calendar to make sure I have to do anything at work. I don't, I have an hour. Okay, so they used this new strategy where they pretended to give these nations independence, and then they uplifted figureheads to carry out their will in the fake independent nations. And so a very, very clear example of this in Africa is the example of the Congo. So the Congo was colonized by Belgium for hundreds of years. Folks are probably familiar with like King Leopold, who was worse than Hitler in that he killed like 7 million African people in the Congo. He looted the Congo for his own personal wealth. He opened up plantations to enslave African people on their own land, and he brutalized them. And then after the world caught wind of what was happening, which was actually due to a queer Irish man who wrote a report. He was like in Belgium or in the Congo for work. And he like saw what was happening, and he was like, what the hell? And he like wrote this like big report, and it got published in Europe. And that's how a lot of Europeans found out what was happening in the Congo. Was a queer Irish man. I feel like I want to look up his name, but I also don't want to like have dead air. So I'll put it in, we'll post about it later on the Facebook page. But yeah, it was a queer Irish man who saw what was happening in the Congo. It was like, man, like these Europeans are in Ireland, still in our land, and look at what's happening here. Like, why am I working for them? And then he went back to Ireland and joined the national liberation struggle there. So yeah, but yeah, so King Leopold colonized the Congo. This queer Irish man like whistle blew on that shit, and once the world was like saw like in like detail what was happening, they were like, this is monstrous. And so then Belgium came in and took over control of the Congo from King Leopold. But Belgium was not better. Belgium was not any less barbaric than King Leopold, and Belgium still looted the Congo for its own personal benefit. So the Congo continued to be colonized, and then the Congolese independence movement rose up, in which the masses of African people in the Congo demanded their liberation, demanded independence. And so in response, the election of Patrice Lumumba happened as the first prime minister of the Congo. And Patrice Lumumba famously gave a speech at the UN where he's basically like, Belgium, y'all have not helped us. Belgium, all you've done is steal from us. Belgium, we have never needed you. We don't need you. We're going to be free. And Belgium could not deal with both the loss of the wealth of the Congo and also this African being up in their faces saying, we don't need you. We don't want you. And so Belgium worked with the United States government to assassinate Patrice Lumumba. And the way that they did that was that there was this resource-rich province in Congo known as Katanga. It had many mines, a lot of wealth, and it had a very large European settler population. And so what Belgium and the United States and also a Belgian mining company did was they deliberately funded a secessionist movement in Katanga. They said, well, Congo is free, but Katanga wants to secede and be free too. And so what the colonizing powers did in this province, which was once again dominated by European settlers, was they lifted up this leader. His name was, I want to say it right, Moise Shombe. Let me put that in the chat. It's an African man whose family had lived in the Congo for a long time in the Katanga province. And they lifted him up as the leader of this fake ass secessionist movement. And so when the Congo was trying to build up an independent nation, trying to like make the constitution, trying to like build up the infrastructure of their independence, Patrice Lumumba was like trying to lead. This man appeared and was like, we're going to take the richest part of the Congo and pull it out. Take it away. Like, to understand that like Katanga was responsible for like the majority of the taxes that the Congolese government received. And those taxes were paid by these mining companies controlled by Belgium and the United States. And so those mining companies propped up the secessionist movement and started giving their taxes to Katanga and to this big ass leader and withholding them from the free Congo nation. And in that way, they are able to create an insurgency, a European-backed insurgency in the Congo, in this province, in the richest province in the Congo. And they're able to use that as like a base area to fuck with Patrice Lumumba. Of course, we know what happened with Patrice Lumumba. He was assassinated by mercenary forces backed by Belgium and the United States. But what you might not know is that Patrice Lumumba was killed in Katanga. They kidnapped him from Leopoldville and they brought him to Katanga, where Belgian mercenaries were waiting with Moise Shombe, the fake-ass leader of the secessionist movement. And that's who killed him, was those Belgian mercenaries that were hired by Moise Shombe and funded by these mining companies by Belgium and the United States. They used this fake Katanganese nationalism. They presented the appearance of a liberation struggle, and they used that liberation struggle to attack Congolese independence. Woo! I was reading about that, a really good book to read about, you know, what I'm talking about is Challenge of the Congo by Kwame Nkrumah. Challenge of the Congo by Kwame Nkrumah, who's again the founder of the APRP. And he goes into detail about how devious the US and Belgium were. Because the US and Belgium were in the UN talking about, yeah, we support Congolese independence. Yeah, we support Patrice Lumumba. At the same time, they were funding this fake ass secessionist movement that they used to deliberately undermine and then ultimately murder Patrice Lumumba. Like, that is neocolonialism. They'll make you think that a liberation struggle is happening. At the same time, they're using that fake ass liberation struggle to attack the actual liberation struggle. And when you see it from the outside, you have no idea what's going on. People are like, oh, I guess Katanga wants to secede. Meanwhile, the whole fucking movement's funded by like a mining company losing the Congo. Oh my God. It's so devious. It's so devious. It's so devious. And there's so many examples of that. But that's the one that's on my mind because I'm reading about it. Like, that's how Patrice Lumumba was killed. He was killed in the Katanga province by this national liberation leader, this movement that was funded by a Belgian mining company that was looting the Congo. Oh my God, like, they're so trifling, so devious and so trifling. So that is neocolonialism. It is when the foreign domination has a face that looks like yours, when they use the appearance of independence and at the same time are still controlling all the internal affairs of the given nation. They're controlling the economy. That's, you know, they were withholding Katanga's fucking taxes, like crippled or intentionally defunded the Congolese government so they couldn't do anything. Oh my God, it makes me really angry. And so they use aid, they use loans, they use sanctions to control the economy, to control the government. They put in the people they want that are gonna know what they do. If someone takes power who is not gonna do what they want, they'll use like subterfuge, underhanded tactics to overthrow that person. Like, that's what happened in Zimbabwe and many, many other places. They sanction the crap out of a country, they destroy the economy, and then they point to the leader that's not what they want, and they're like, oh, that guy did it. Be angry at him. And they use that as the basis to overthrow that government and put in a puppet if they want. That's what happened in Honduras as well. So that's neocolonialism. It is at this point the primary form of colonialism on the planet alongside settler colonialism. And states can be both settler states and also have neocolonialism happening. Yeah, someone just pointed out Venezuela comes to mind. That's another example of a country being sanctioned and attacked in all these underhanded ways. And then instead of looking at the attacks, people look at the leader and say it's his fault. It's their fault. Meanwhile, like, the foreign power is attempting to overthrow their government with all these different strategies. And everybody's just blaming the person in charge. Anywho, so that's neocolonialism. I want to wrap it up. Wrap it up now. I'm tired of talking. So we talked about crude colonialism. We talked about settler colonialism. We talked about neocolonialism. Neocolonialism is the dominant form of colonial strategy on the planet in this moment, but settler colonialism is up there as well, and a state can be both a settler state and engage in tactics of neocolonialism. Like, that's like the United States' whole motherfucking brand. Like, that is what the United States does. It is settler colonialism, where they are continuing the dispossession of indigenous peoples, stealing their land, but they are also engaged in acts of neocolonialism against internally and externally colonized populations. That is why Barack Obama was elected US president. It wasn't just about, having like the first African president. It was also about using him as a strategy of counterinsurgency against African people, not just the United States, but also in Africa. Like I said, he oversaw the biggest U.S. military expansion of the U.S. military's footprint in Africa in history. It was Barack Obama that did that. AFRICOM started during the end of the last term of George W. Bush, but it became like a continental project under Barack Obama. Because George W. Bush and even Bill Clinton, they could not have done that. If they had attempted to expand AFRICOM to the degree that it exists right now, people would have rightfully been like, what is this cracker doing? We will not accept this. But because Barack Obama looked like us, because Barack Obama's father was from Kenya, because Barack Obama was presented like he was on our side, African people, not just the United States, but also in Africa, watched that shit happen. We watched the U.S. empire expand its military footprint in Africa, and no one questioned it. No one questioned it. When the struggle against apartheid was ongoing, there was massive solidarity movements in the United States. People were fighting back whenever a U.S. company invested in any kind of way in apartheid. African people in the United States had something to say about it. It was happening under, European president, and we understood clearly what was happening. When Barack Obama invaded Africa and put the U.S. military, U.S. military bases all over the continent, started drone bombing Somalia. No African people, very few African people in the United States have anything to say, because we assumed, because of what he looked like, that he was on our side. He was a strategy of counterinsurgency. You can also see it in his relationship to the Black Lives Matter movement, where he was like scolding. I remember very clearly, very clearly, Barack Obama scolding us for the tactics that we were using, scolding the youth that are rising up in cities like Ferguson and Baltimore for the so-called uncivilized way that they were fighting back, right? I remember that clearly. And at the same time that he was scolding Black Lives Matter and moving for Black Lives activists, Ferguson activists, he was also allowing the federal government to spy on and target those same organizers, those same youth. Woo! He like spied on Black Lives Matter. He gave folks like felony charges. There's still like kids locked up for life behind charges they caught in those uprisings. And at the same time as he was spying and criminalizing and targeting African youth, he was also arming the police that were terrorizing Black Lives Matter protests with military weapons. The 1033 program, once again, was begun, I think it was begun under Bill Clinton. And it was again drastically expanded under U.S. President Barack Obama. The first African president gave police in the U.S. millions of dollars in military weapons. Millions of dollars. 10 times more. It's not an exact number, but much more than the Bush administration before him. The Bush administration, to this day, it's like a lot of shit. Although the neoliberal class is attempting to rehabilitate him with success. But people, for the most part, are still like, fuck George Bush. But they do not say the same thing about Barack Obama, even though across the board, he intensified the attacks against social justice movements that began under George W. Bush. He gets no shit, even though he gave the cops the tanks and the tear gas and the military and like the drones and like the fucking assault rifles. He gave them that equipment. That's the federal government under Barack Obama drastically expanded the 1033 program, and he gets no shit for that. No shit. And then in addition to like the criminalization, in addition to the attacks by the police, he also, because of his identity, was able to engage in acts of manipulation and co-option that changed the focus of the Black Lives Matter movement, that allowed people to believe that he could be worked with, that allowed the U.S. federal government to define the parameters of the struggle, to say, we need more police, more African police, we need body cameras. We need roundtables of police and activists and all kinds of shit that wasn't going to do a goddamn thing. Barack Obama, because he was African, was allowed to redefine the terms of the struggle in such a way that it was no longer a threat to the U.S. government. And so now when people are like, you know, Biden is going to be easier to organize under than Trump, I'm like, you are delusional, because we still to this day have not fully assessed the damage that the last Democratic president was able to do to the struggle for African liberation and to the struggle against police terrorism. Let me see what y'all are saying. I've been ignoring the comments because I was ranting. Let me see. Hope says, go off on Isamu. Thank you. Comrade Hope from the Red Nation. Yes, we say the United Snakes. The United Snakes of America, because it's a country led by snakes. Country that's I was like almost like an anti-Semitic trope. So it's not a country led by snakes. We're just using snakes as like a pejorative to be like, this country sucks. It's just a country that was built on genocide, was built on theft. And we just like to insult it in any way we can. And that's why we say United States. Rari Visual says they tried to send his tooth back. Yeah, so let's talk about Patrice Lumumba. So Patrice Lumumba was murdered in the Katanga province. And then after they killed him, the Belgian mercenaries, they dissolved his body in acid. And then all that was left was his teeth. And they kept his fucking teeth. And then for a really, really long time, Belgium and the United States denied having anything to do with the murder of Patrice Lumumba. And then ultimately they admitted it, like in the 80s. There's a really good documentary actually on YouTube. You can watch the whole thing, a BBC documentary talking about Cuba's internationalism in Africa. Because unlike the United States, when Cuba shows up in Africa, they're there to actually help. They're not there to steal, they're there to help us get free. And so there was a Cuban solidarity mission in the Congo that was like surveilled by the CIA, surveilled by the U.S. Embassy in the Congo. The U.S. embassies around the world are very often fronts for U.S. imperialist intervention. And so there was like a CIA agent in the U.S. Embassy, and he's like talking in this documentary, the BBC documentary about Cuba and Africa. And he like straight up admits that they killed Patrice Lumumba and they like dissolved his body in acid and they kept his tooth. Woo! And so yeah, I think a couple of years ago, they were like, okay, y'all know we did it. Do you want his tooth back? I hate the United States. I hate Belgium. I hate Europe as an entity. I hate colonization. This subject makes me really angry because, like, the example of the Congo, like, if they had just been, like, left alone, if y'all had just, like, they fought for their independence. They won their independence. They elected the man they wanted. Imagine if they just been left alone. Like, leave them alone. Like, let them be free. Like, what are you doing? Because, oh my God, like, it makes me so angry. It makes me so angry the extent that these powers go to control these countries, to destroy our destiny, to make sure that we are always on the bottom. Even when we fight. We win our independence. We elect the leaders we want. They still won't leave us alone. Like, leave us alone. Leave us alone. And then they turn around and say, y'all don't know how to be free. You're not civilized. You need us. No. Like, if y'all had left the Congo alone, the Congo would be a better place right now. If y'all had minded your business and let Patrice Lumumba do what he needed to do, I can't even, like, the Congo is like just looted by US corporations to this day. Like Google, Microsoft, Apple, Tesla, they all the devices they make that y'all own are made using resources stolen from the Congo. I'm gonna cry. It makes me so angry. Like, just leave us alone. Leave us alone. We don't need you. If you just left us alone, I can't even imagine what the planet would be like. My God, like, it makes me so angry. The Congo, thinking about the Congo and what they did and what's happening to this day. So people can have iPhones, so people can have Fitbits and Priuses. Like, it makes me so angry. There will never be a day when I defend this system or attempt to save this system. Y'all can go to hell. We're gonna burn it down, because nothing built on this kind of violence deserves to exist. Nothing. Fuck the United States of America. Fuck Belgium. Fuck Europe. Everything you are belongs to us. You stole it from us. And you put us on the bottom and you told us it was our fault. It makes me so angry. I mean, calm down. I'm talking about Kamala Harris. Kamala refused to prosecute clergy pedophiles in California, but aggressively worked to criminalize juvenile truancy. Yeah, it's true. Her office, when she was district attorney, hid all of these records showing sexual violence against youth propagated by the Catholic Church, and declined to prosecute. At the same time as she's doing that, she's saying that she's locking up people's parents to help youth. Like, you are hiding molestation, systematic molestation of children, and then locking up parents and saying you're helping those children. And then you tell me that I should be happy because she's a fucking blackface in a high place? No, ma'am. Fuck Kamala Harris. I hate that lady. Anyway, Venezuela. Can socialism be used to combat colonialism and sanctions? Yes. So Cuba is like a really good example of this. Cuba is an extremely good example because Cuba has been blockaded by the United States for over 60 years. It is the longest economic blockade in history. And despite that fact, even though Cuba is desperately poor, even though the United States is attempting to strangle Cuba to death, to choke its economy, to make the people suffer, Cuba is still thriving. They have some of the best healthcare on the planet, if not the best healthcare. They have a extremely actually green economy. They are in the same place. Like, they get hit with the same hurricanes as every other Caribbean nation in that area. But if you notice, when those nations are destroyed, when those nations are flooded, when their cities are like razed to the ground by catastrophic climate change, the same thing does not really happen in Cuba. They still get damaged. They still suffer the impact of hurricanes, but Cuba has organized its economy in such a way that when climate change happens, when hurricanes hit, they're able to like rebuild and recover very, very quickly. They have a plan, an 100-year plan to address climate change in Cuba. They have invested in sustainable development of energy and sustainable relationships with the planet. We visited a place in Cuba, I forget what it's called, Las Terrazas, which was basically like an eco-village, right? Where when Cuba was still colonized, when it was still capitalist under Batista, all of these indigenous plants had gone extinct, right? And then after the Cuban Revolution, particularly after the fall of the USSR during the special period, they were forced, really, because of the blockade and because they had like lost access to like all these resources from the USSR. They were forced to engage in a process of of like greening the economy, of investing in organic agriculture and investing in, you know, the preservation of land and water. And so in that area of Las Terrazas, where all of these plants and animals had gone extinct under capitalism, they were able to bring that life back. They were able to like bring back the extinct plants and bring back the extinct animal life. Like they showed us trees that they said had been like almost wiped out. And they were able to bring back that are now everywhere. So Cuba is a really good example of, despite like the economic attacks, because of the strength of the socialist project, because of the strength of the revolution, they're able to resist. The blockade still has to fall. Like, it is our responsibility as people who believe in the justice of the United States to fight the blockade on Cuba. But Cuba, because of its revolution, Cuba, because of its commitment to life and socialism, has been able to mitigate the impact of that blockade. They're still suffering, but if I could choose where to be during a global pandemic, if I had the option, I would go to Cuba and stay, to be honest with you. To be honest, like, I went to Cuba last summer for the first time, and there's like at least once a week, I'm like, why the hell did I leave? Why did I leave Cuba? This place sucks. So yeah, there are definitely ways that socialist projects can mitigate the impact of sanctions, can mitigate the impact of blockades, but also those blockades, like us in the States, us as U.S. citizens whose tax dollars are used to attack these countries, have a responsibility to fight those blockades, even as those nations are struggling to resist them. Cool. Anywho, Hope is saying your anger is completely valid and justified, but colonialism burned down. Hope understands. Hope is an indigenous person. Hope understands very clearly why I'm so angry, because the same, like, very similar things were done to African indigenous peoples. Very similar things. One thing that, you know, movements, social justice movements in the United States tend to do is like exceptionalize or particularize like the struggles, our individual struggles, to be like, oh, the struggle of the United States or the Africans of the United States is unique and has no connection to anything that's been ever done to anybody. But that's not true. It's not true. Colonialism uses the same tactics adapted to particular contexts in place after place after place. And so if we understand the similar ways that we have been attacked, we can work together more effectively to burn this shit down, to destroy colonization once and for all. We must, instead of exceptionalizing our struggle, instead of saying no one has suffered as we have suffered, see the connections. See the connections within this global system of domination. Like I said, this is a settler state. Israel, the settler state. Zimbabwe was a settler state. Tanzania is still a settler state. And if you look at how settler colonialism unfolded in those places, also Australia, it has the same tactics, The U.S. has reservations where they put indigenous people on their own land, marginalize them. Tanzania has Bantustans where they put the indigenous Africans and corral them and marginalize them. Like, if you look at how colonialism actually functions, you find the same tactics. And so I am extremely against exceptionalizing struggles of colonized peoples, because I feel like it obscures like the connections between what's been done to us. And we have to understand those connections to stop it. Once we understand that the very same people that enslaved my ancestors were the same people who stole indigenous people's land, once we understand the very same people funding the genocide against Palestinians are giving tanks to the police here and training those police about how to brutalize them. Once we understand the connections of this global structure of colonization and imperialism, we can begin to work together to burn it down, to build something better. So yeah, you will never hear me saying like this particular struggle is unique and nothing like this has ever happened, because it's never true. It's never true. I tell the truth. It's not true. But yes. Woo! Okay, so Jose said solidarity obligates us to eschew exceptionalism. Throw it out. I agree. All forms of exceptionalism in the United States are reactionary. They're reactionary. Even if you're coming from the perspective of an oppressed person, and you are saying I have an exceptional struggle against oppression, all that really is the internalization of the myth of the United States that says the United States is somehow unique in terms of its strategies of conquest in world history. But again, if you actually struggle, what has been done to colonize peoples in Africa, in Central and South America, in Asia, in the United States, in Canada, you see the same shit, the same strategies. We have to understand it's the same people giving us hell all over the world. It's the same people. Once we get that, once we get the same fight, against the same enemy on many, many different fronts, the colonized nations of the earth are gonna come together just like they are in Black Hammer. Black Hammer is like, it's a really, really, I feel like it's extremely historically significant and they don't get credit because Black Hammer is an organization of all colonized peoples. No Europeans, just colonized peoples, all working together within the same organization to defeat colonization. That is what needs to happen. I think that it's fine to have African organizations focused on African liberation, indigenous organizations focused on indigenous liberation, Filipino organizations focused on Filipino organizations, so on and so on and so on. Like, that's fine. And then organizations were all together, also fine. But fundamentally, you must understand that it's the same fight on many, many different fronts. We are fighting the same enemy and we must be in solidarity with each other. It's not just about being the right thing to do. It is how we win and end this once and for all. Once and for all. So exceptionalizing struggles is the wrong move. It is reactionary. It is an outgrowth of American nationalism and American exceptionalism, and I reject it on every level. Every level. Anywho. Oh yeah, so last thing I want to end with is that the way that we end colonization is to engage in armed struggles led by colonized nations for national liberation. We are not attempting to assimilate into genocidal settler states, into neocolonial empires. We are not attempting to have better conditions within a fundamentally colonial structure. No, we are attempting to destroy that structure entirely and replace them with structures in which we are free, in which we determine our own destinies. We have to be in uncompromising conflict with the structure of colonialism, with the structure of capitalism, with the structure of imperialism. We must be in uncompromising conflict. We cannot seek to assimilate. We cannot seek citizenship within settler states. No, we must destroy them and build something better in its place. And the way to do that is through armed struggles, revolutionary struggles for national liberation. That is how African people chased settler colonialism out of Zimbabwe, chased settler colonialism out of Algeria, chased settler colonialism out of Namibia. We engaged in armed struggles to overthrow colonialism. And that's precisely what needs to happen with neocolonialism. We have to recognize that they are using people that look like us to prop up this system, and we must treat those people like the enemies that they are, like the traitors that they are. Fuck Barack Obama. Fuck Kamala Harris. Fuck all these African faces in high places that got there by selling us out. They are not on our side. If you are like a merciful person, I'm not. I'm an Aries. I got like big OEI energy. I'm down with like burning down shit. But if you are more mellow than me, and you're like, we need to give people a chance, right? We have to like see if they'll come to the right side. That's fine. We have to build the independent political power of African people, of colonized peoples. We have to build movements that are refusing to compromise with this system. And then we have to give them the choice, right? You can come to the winning team or you can fall with the enemy. If you are more compassionate than me, because at this point it's like, fuck Barack Obama, right? But if you're more compassionate than me and you want to give that man the chance to do right, then build up the independent political power of the movement for African liberation and force him to pick a side. And I guarantee you that man's gonna fall with the enemy. But if you just want to see for yourself, help us build a movement for Pan-Africanism. Help us build the movement for national liberation for African people and for colonized people. And force these sellouts to pick a side. So yeah, we must refuse to compromise with colonialism, with capitalism, with imperialism. We must build revolutionary movements for national liberation to destroy colonialism. We must fight for our liberation. And lucky for us, if you are a colonized person, your ancestors fought this. There's never been a moment in history where a foreign power invaded a nation and that nation just took it quietly. It has never happened. It has never happened. It has never happened. Listen to me. It has never, ever, ever happened. Wherever foreign domination exists, there is resistance. Wherever colonialism exists, wherever imperialism exists, there is resistance. Our people have been fighting back against these structures for hundreds of years, continuously. The only reason that I am able to talk to y'all on this computer in this place is because my ancestors refused to submit to this system. I would not be here talking to y'all if not for the fact that my ancestors refused to submit. And it's true for your ancestors as well. If you are a colonized person, Irish person, indigenous person, Palestinian person, our ancestors fought this every single step of the way. Do not listen to these lies that we are told in school that say that our people just like rolled over and died. It did not happen like that. Wherever foreign domination exists, there is resistance to it, no matter what form it takes. So understand, watching this, if you're African, if you're indigenous, if you're a colonized person, that our people fought back. And we have to reclaim that history and continue that struggle ourselves, and revolutionary organizations fighting for liberation. You should be proud. You should be proud of what your ancestors did to make it possible for you to be here today. Be proud, be angry. Be angry as fuck at the colonizer, but be proud of your people for fighting back, for making it possible for you to live today. We must organize movements of national liberation, revolutionary anti-colonial movements to overthrow this system, and we must unite those movements across nations to work together to bring it down. That's the only way it's going to end, but it will end, because like I said, wherever foreign domination exists, there will be resistance. Someone's saying hello from Turkey. Hi. Hello from Turkey, or hi from Tiwa territory, Turkey. Shada saying yes, all over world history, referring to the connections between the different ways that colonizers work, the same strategies in place after place. Hope is saying yes, we need to work together. We have to see each other's struggles. We have the same oppressors and colonizers. Fuck American exceptionalism. I strongly agree. So that was the PE section. That was like 90 minutes. Let me actually drink something. I'm gonna go into the closing now. Like I said, I'm tired of talking, and then I said I was tired of talking, and then I talked for 20 more minutes. Anywho, so yeah, that was PE. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for following along. We do that every single show. Hey, Nkrumah Ture, greetings. Thanks for watching. That was a really good name, Nkrumah Ture. So what's up with this raggedy pandemic? What's happening with COVID? So yeah. We are in a situation where the US empire is the center of the COVID pandemic. We're also in a situation where, yes, it's an APIP shirt. Someone's saying in the comments, your shirt is fly. And it's an APIP shirt that I modified to suit my aesthetic. I like the open shoulders. Anywho, so yeah, the US empire is the center of the COVID pandemic. The ruling class and all the political leadership of the United States has basically just like absolutely failed at organizing any kind of reasonable response. And so as a result, thousands of people are dying, mostly African and indigenous people and Chicano people, like the most marginalized folks, are suffering the worst impact. And as we see this like utter failure of all levels of leadership within the US government, as we see this utter failure unfolding to protect people, we also see a situation where the majority of the response to COVID-19 in the United States is focused on shaming people for individual actions. There's, of course, like, you know, the people that don't want to wear masks, and a lot of people are like motherfucking racist, like they suck. And so like there's like the opening protests and like the reaction, all the reaction politics that come with that. And that's real. I get why that pisses people off. But I've also watched people like straight up like cuss out strangers for not following like rules and regulations that have been extremely confusing and contradictory from the very beginning. Like it's regular ass people, like poor working class people, attacking each other for not doing this right, while at the same time, the people who actually have the power are leaving y'all to die. They're leaving us to die, and then they're encouraging us to attack each other while they're leaving us to die. They're like escaping all accountability for the situation while we focus on attacking other poor working class people. It's like breathtaking. Like it's so like it's like devious, nefarious, right? Like they're so good at distracting us from what they're doing and making us focus on each other. Meanwhile, like this started in what, like in March, and we got those like half-assed like eviction moratoriums, right? But even with the moratoriums, like rent was not frozen, so people's rent, like they couldn't get evicted for 6 months, but they were still getting charged rent, and now they're all expired, and people are getting evicted like by like the thousands. Soon it's gonna be like the millions, and there's still like no discussion whatsoever of freezing rent. People are saying stay home, like all the you know, talking heads and elected officials and like people on Facebook are like stay home, you piece of shit. But people are still being forced to go to work. Like if you work like fast food or like in a supermarket or like for Instacart or Uber, like you have no choice. Like people are like stay home, but you still have to pay your rent and you still have to eat. And if you work full time, your health insurance is tied to your job. And people are like stay home, but if you don't work, you can't make money. You can't eat or pay your rent and you lose your health insurance. Like it's really like people are being put into an impossible situation and then being like scolded for not dealing with it right. And at the same time, the people that actually have the power to make it not an impossible situation are not doing anything and no one's talking about them. It's really remarkable. It's really remarkable. Like there's all this like messaging about don't join your family for Thanksgiving. Don't travel for Thanksgiving. And I don't celebrate Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is a colonizer holiday. Thanksgiving only exists as a holiday because of the genocide against indigenous people and the theft of their land. So I don't celebrate that shit. But watching people like attack each other for even like thinking about traveling for Thanksgiving, while at the same time the people who have failed us on every level are scolding us, like, it's very like, I'm just like, man, like the finger is pointing the wrong way. Like y'all pointing like side to side and down, and you should be like pointing up. Because while it's frustrating that people like refuse to accept that COVID exists, while it's frustrating that some people don't want to wear masks, while it's frustrating that like, you know, people are still like partying or whatever, the fact of the matter is that this situation would not be what it is in the United States if the government and the people in power actually cared if you lived or died. If like systematic efforts have been done to make it possible for people to stay home, particularly essential workers. If universal health care was a real thing in the United States. So like, yeah, I get it. I get why people are like frustrated with each other, but I'm also like, man, like the ruling class like hella pulled this off. Like they really like completely misdirected the blame and like got like poor people to be angry at each other really effectively. Like it's like, I'm like, damn sis. Like the mayor of Boston said that people are mostly catching COVID at work, right? And then he said it's because they're not being careful enough. He said that workplaces are an increasingly high risk area. Like a lot of the spread of COVID in Massachusetts is happening at workplaces. And then he said it's because y'all aren't being careful enough. Oh my God, like people shouldn't have to go to work during a global pandemic. Like if people actually knew that if they stayed home, they wouldn't get evicted or lose their health insurance or not be able to eat anymore, they would do that. But because there's no safety net in place to make it possible for them to stay home, they're going to work. And then they go to work and get sick. And the mayor of Boston's like, you piece of shit. You should have been more careful. I'm like, damn. Like, oh my God, you have the power. The president has the power. Like, the Senate has the power to make this doable for people. And they're not doing anything. And then they're blaming people. And then they got us to blame each other. Like, woo, that's wild. That's really wild to me. Fact of the matter is that it doesn't really matter. Like, individual actions can only do so much. Like, of course, wear a mask. Of course, social distance. Of course, like, do your best to stay home, even though I fully understand that probably for the majority of people watching me, you still got to work, and working from home is not an option. So telling people to stay home when that's the reality is like kind of like insulting. But like individual actions can only do so much. There needs to be some kind of state response. That's why the government exists, except under capitalism, they only care about generating wealth for the ruling class, and the rest of y'all can fuck off. But the fact of the matter is that individual actions are not going to get us out of this. Waiting for this like vaccine that, I don't know about that, y'all. But waiting for this vaccine to come in and save the day is not going to get us out of this. The fact of the matter is that if we want to stop the spread of this virus, if we want people to stop getting sick, then we have to make it possible for them to stay home. We have to pay people to stay home, and we need universal fucking healthcare. We need healthcare. Like imagine, man, like people can't even afford the test. If they get COVID, they can start getting symptoms. And in a lot of places, the test is hundreds of dollars and they don't have health insurance. So they can't even tell if they have it, and they have to keep going to work. And then you yell at them. Woo! We need universal healthcare, and we need people to stay home. We need a mass poor working class people's movement, a colonized people's movement, demanding justice in this pandemic. We need to stop pointing fingers at each other when the people in charge are failing us. They are failing us, and then they're letting us fight amongst ourselves. They're probably laughing, bro. Oh my God. I remember, George Floyd was murdered in May. He was murdered on African Liberation Day, May 25th. And then in response, there was a global uprising against police terrorism in solidarity with African people. Biggest uprising against police terrorism, I believe, in world history. Just millions of people around the world took to the streets for justice for African people who are suffering under police terrorism. And it's wild to me that that happened, that movement emerged, right? At the same time as tens of thousands of African people were dying needlessly from this pandemic in the United States. But those deaths started happening. It became clear that African, Indigenous, and Chicano and colonized people were the majority of the deaths. And it was almost like people just like accepted it. Like, obviously the people who lost loved ones from this pandemic didn't accept it. But in terms of it provoking like a mass uprising, it was like nothing was happening. And then we see a video of one man being slowly killed, and it was horrifying, right? But that is what provoked people to take to the streets. And it's just very like, yeah, like thousands of African people died for no reason for months before that. And it was just happening in the background, and it's still happening. And people are just like, but one man dies on video and it's a global uprising. And it makes me ask, like, imagine if we rose up for African and colonized people dying for no reason during this pandemic, dying because of colonization, the same way that we rose up for George Floyd. Imagine if at all of those protests, when we are in the streets for him, the demands and the chants included an acknowledgement of the thousands of African, Indigenous, and colonized people who are dying who don't have to. Like, how do we build a movement that sees the everyday violence of capitalism and colonization and makes it a part of what we're resisting? It doesn't make any sense to me that people can see this video of this man dying and ignore the African people who are dying because they're forced to go to work and have no health insurance. It's the same violence. It's the same system doing that. So how do we make that connection in our movements? How do we say that this death from the police is as unacceptable as this preventable death from COVID-19? How do we make that connection? How do we see that it's the same system causing this violence against African, against colonized people? We have to make that connection. We have to rise up the same way for the preventable deaths from capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism that we do for the viral videos. We have to, because these people, the people in charge they're not helping us. They're not doing anything. They're not stopping this. They're letting us die. They're letting us die. And we're just accepting it and yelling at each other. So yeah, that's something I've been thinking about a lot, actually for months, to be honest with you. Because yeah, I watched that shit happen. And, you know, it's always beautiful to see people resist. But at the same time, I was like, damn, like we're just like dying in the background. It's just like part of it was just accepted. I don't know. Anywho, we need universal health care. We need to pay people to stay home. We need to stop fighting amongst ourselves. We need to hold people responsible, actually accountable, and stop blaming each other. That is what I want to say about COVID today. And Comrade saying, I don't trust any vaccine put out by the US. I agree. Especially like not this like rushed ass vaccine. I don't know, man. It just kind of feels like they're trying to do like a magic bullet with this vaccine that was like rushed out and not dealing with the systemic problems that are actually leading people to die. Because like all of these other countries, Cuba, Venezuela, Vietnam, China, all of these other countries were able to get the pandemic under control. You know, like the whole world basically, outside of Europe, was able to get the pandemic under control. Africa was able to get the pandemic under control without a vaccine by just taking measures to make it possible for people to stay home and to keep them safe. The United States refused to do that and is now putting all of its hope on this vaccine and these like half-assed too late shutdowns while still denying people universal health care. So yeah, it just feels like they're trying to do like a magic bullet with something that's like not fully tested and unproven. Anywho, so wrapping it up, upcoming events for APIP New Mexico. This coming Wednesday at 6 p.m. So next week, Wednesday at 6 p.m. we are hosting the New Mexico Vents and Emos Brigade, which is the New Mexico delegation of the VB Solidarity with Cuba organization, is hosting a panel of African, Indigenous, and Chicano activists talking about African Indigenous solidarity and the history of Cuban internationalism. Like I said, the ultimate defeat of colonialism and imperialism and capitalism depends on colonized nations uniting and fighting in solidarity with each other, fighting this big ass beast that's oppressing us all on all different fronts. And so this coming Wednesday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, We're going to be talking to Ajamu Umi of the APRP, who actually recruited me into the APRP. We're talking to Reyes Devore of Pueblo Action Alliance. We're going to be talking to Lewis Head of the Southwest Organizing Project about the necessity of uniting struggles against struggles of African and Indigenous and Chicano liberation, and also how we can look to the history of how Cuba has shown up in solidarities with many, many struggles around the world for an example of how we need to work together. So again, that's Wednesday, this coming Wednesday at 6 p.m. That is Wednesday the 25th, the day before Thanksgiving. 6 p.m. Mountain Time, a panel on African and Indigenous solidarity and the history of Cuban internationalism, which you can join live on the New Mexico Venceremos Brigade Facebook page. Wednesday, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Also, we've been doing on the show a series of 101 type conversations describing concepts that are key to the liberation struggle for African people and colonized people. So we've done what is socialism, we've done what is a bourgeois election, we've done what is revolutionary solidarity. Today we did what is colonialism, and next week we are doing what is imperialism. Now you understand colonialism, now you understand socialism. Now we're going to talk about next Thursday at 12 p.m. Mountain Time, imperialism. I'm sure you've heard that word before, but you might not know specifically what it means, and so we're going to go into detail next Thursday with a special guest. So that's happening Thursday, 12 p.m. Mountain Time, Thursday the 26th. Thanksgiving. And don't stop. We don't celebrate that shit. I also have a meeting that night because we don't celebrate Thanksgiving. That holiday only exists because genocide was committed against indigenous people. It's a fake ass holiday, settler ass holiday. We don't celebrate that shit. So the work does not stop. It's happening 12 p.m. Mountain Time. Tune in. I know you're not working unless you work retail, which if you do, my heart is with you. I have worked Thanksgiving at Kohl's department store and that shit sucked. So if you have to work on Thanksgiving, solidarity, comrade. But if you are not working, if you're off work, please tune in 12 p.m. Mountain Time next Thursday for What is Imperialism. And I just want to conclude the show by saying, if you can hear my voice and you're not active in a revolutionary organization, we need you to join an organization. Join an organization. If you are African, get in touch, drop it in the comments that you want to hear from us, and we welcome you in the African People's Revolutionary Party. If you are Indigenous, check out the Red Nation and Pueblo Action Alliance. If you are not in New Mexico, I guarantee you, there are revolutionary, socialist, anarchist, communist organizations doing work in your city that need help. There is no organization doing social justice work that is not understaffed, my friend. I'm in like 5 organizations and I work more than 40 hours a week. And that's not by choice. That's because this work needs to happen. We don't have enough people, man. So I guarantee you that there is an organization fighting the good fight near you that needs help, and you need to find those people and you need to help them. You need to get off the sidelines. Because if you're not in an organization fighting for justice, you should consider yourself on the sidelines. So you need to get off the sidelines and get active in the fight for justice. Get active in the fight to destroy colonization. Get active in the fight to overthrow capitalism once and for all. We need everybody. We need all hands on deck. Capitalism, imperialism, colonialism is the most organized system that has ever existed in the history of the world. And it exists for domination. It exists for oppression. In order to destroy capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism, we, oppressed people, must be organized. We must be organized, otherwise we will not win. We need folks active, fighting for justice. And every single time I say that shit, there's always like at least one person that's like, but my individual circumstances do not allow me to organize. They'll be like, I'm in school, I'm too busy, or I just don't have capacity, or you know, any kind of reason why they should be the exception to what I'm saying. Like, you don't join an organization. And I just have to say, like I said, I work 40 plus hours a week. And I'm in like 5 different organizations. And again, it's not by choice. It's because it's the work I have to do. Because in order to build this movement, if we don't have enough people, then the rest of us that are in it have to step up. We're forced to, right? But the reality situation is that all kinds of people with all kinds of life circumstances, abilities, ages are engaged in revolutionary work. Like the people that I have learned the most from in the All African People's Revolutionary Party are in like their 70s and 80s, are disabled, work full time. Like we got all kinds of problems, brain problems, body problems, all kinds of shit happening in our lives, all kinds of things. Kids, like I used to, when I was in the Oregon chapter, one of the other cadre in the chapter was a single mother of 3 children. 3 children, and she was at every meeting. So please, like, people always say, like, but what about me? What about my exception? I'm just like, I don't even engage anymore because there's no excuse. There's no excuse. The people that wrote the books, the people that engaged in the struggles that made it possible for us even to be here today, were doing that work under conditions of like immense suffering and sacrifice. Like when you think about the struggles against colonization in the United States, in Africa, in Central and South America, and what those people were up against, the conditions in which they were fighting and organizing, when someone's like, man, I'm too busy in this first world country to organize, I'm like, you should get on my face. You should get on my face. When people are like, I have, you know, this intersection or this issue that makes it impossible for me to organize, I think about all of the disabled and elder and, you know what I'm saying? Like all of these people that had all the same intersections you do that still did this work because they wanted to be free. The fact of the matter is that if you prioritize something